In the darkest corner of the galaxy, where even stars feared to shine, a single human stood against an empire that had already conquered 1,000 worlds. They called it Christmas, a strange human tradition that somehow made entire civilizations remember what they had lost. The Zephyrian Empire had crushed rebellions, silenced prophets, and extinguished the hopes of countless species. But they had never encountered anything quite like Marcus Chun, a maintenance worker on mining station Omega-7, who refused to let them take away the one thing that made beings across the galaxy believe in miracles again. What started as an imperial decree to eliminate a primitive human superstition became the greatest threat the Empire had ever faced. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon against tyranny isn't a plasma cannon or a fleet of warships. Sometimes it's just one person who refuses to give up on hope, no matter how impossible the odds. This is the story of how a single flickering light became a beacon that would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished repairing the atmospheric recycler in Section C7. The mining station hummed around him with the constant vibration of industrial machinery. But something felt different today. The usual chatter over the communication systems had been replaced by an eerie silence that made his skin crawl. He had been working on mining station Omega-7 for 3 years now, ever since the Zephyrian Empire had liberated his home planet of New Terra from what they called primitive human governance. Liberation was their word for conquest, of course, but Marcus had learned to keep such thoughts to himself. The Empire didn't tolerate dissent, and a maintenance worker's opinions mattered less than the dust that collected in the air filters. As he gathered his tools, the station's main communication array crackled to life with an announcement that would change everything. "Attention all citizens of the Zephyrian Empire," came the cold, mechanical voice of Emperor Vexhai himself. Marcus had only heard the Emperor speak once before, during the conquest of New Terra, and the sound still sent chills down his spine. By Imperial Decree 4847, the human practice known as Christmas is hereby declared illegal throughout all Imperial territories. Marcus dropped his plasma wrench. It clattered against the metal floor, echoing through the maintenance tunnel like a gunshot. The Emperor's voice continued, emotionless and final. "This primitive superstition has been spreading among conquered species like a virus, undermining imperial authority and promoting dangerous concepts of unity and rebellion. All Christmas celebrations, decorations, music, and related activities are forbidden effective immediately. Violators will be subjected to neural reconditioning or termination." Around him, Marcus could hear the sounds of other workers stopping what they were doing. On a station with over 10,000 beings from a dozen different species, the announcement hit like a shock wave. Christmas had become more than just a human tradition. It had somehow become a symbol of hope for everyone living under imperial rule. Marcus thought about the small Christmas tree he had hidden in his quarters, made from spare wire and pieces of colored metal he had salvaged from broken equipment. He thought about the way his Vectari roommate Zeph had helped him decorate it last year, even though Zeph's species had never heard of Christmas before humans arrived. He thought about how beings throughout the station had started quietly celebrating the holiday, sharing small gifts and moments of kindness that reminded them of home. The Emperor's voice cut through his memories like a blade. "Imperial forces are already moving to eliminate all traces of this infection from our territories. The human responsible for its initial spread will be made an example of. Christmas ends now." The communication channel went silent. Marcus stood alone in the maintenance tunnel, his mind racing. He knew exactly what this meant. The Empire had identified Christmas as a threat not because of its religious significance, but because it gave people hope. It reminded them that there was something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. He made his way back to the main corridors of the station, passing clusters of workers speaking in hushed tones. The Vectari were chittering nervously among themselves, their blue skin pale with worry. A group of Thorian miners stood silent, their massive frames hunched with defeat. Even the usually cheerful Pixians seemed subdued, their luminescent skin dim with sadness. Marcus found Zeph in the communal area, staring at the large view screen that showed the vast expanse of space beyond the station. His friend's forearms were wrapped around himself in a gesture of distress that Marcus had learned to recognize. They really meant it, didn't they? Zeph said without turning around. His translator device gave his words a mechanical quality, but Marcus could hear the emotion underneath. They're going to take away Christmas. It looks that way, Marcus replied, sitting down beside his friend. The communal area was usually filled with the sounds of different species sharing meals and stories, but today it was nearly empty. Zeph turned to face him, his large black eyes reflecting the starlight from the view screen. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Christmas, it changed my people. Not just me, but my whole family back on Vector Prime. When I told them about the holiday, about the way humans celebrate kindness and giving, they started doing it too. Quietly, in secret, but they did it. Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. How many others? Thousands. Maybe hundreds of thousands across the sector. The tradition spread through the refugee networks, through the work crews, through the prison colonies. People started calling it the human gift, this idea that even in the darkest times, you could still choose to be kind. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Christmas hadn't just been a human tradition anymore. It had become a galactic movement. No wonder the Emperor saw it as a threat. As they sat in silence, the station's communication system crackled again. This time it was their local administrator, a thin Zephyrian official named Commissar Thylex. All station personnel report to Cargo Bay Alpha immediately for mandatory loyalty screening. Imperial enforcement teams are conducting searches for contraband Christmas materials. Cooperation is required. Marcus and Zeph exchanged glances. They both knew what that meant. Anyone found with Christmas decorations, music, or even memories of celebrating the holiday would be taken away for neural reconditioning, a polite term for having their minds wiped clean. I have to go get something, Marcus said quietly. Zeph grabbed his arm with two of his hands. Marcus, don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. They'll kill you. But Marcus was already standing up. In his quarters, hidden behind a loose panel in the wall, was his small Christmas tree. It wasn't much, just twisted wire and salvaged metal. But it represented something the Empire couldn't understand. It represented the human refusal to let darkness win. I'll be quick, he said, pulling away from Zeph's grip. The corridors were mostly empty as Marcus made his way to the residential section. Most of the station's inhabitants were already heading to the cargo bay, their faces grim with resignation. But, as he walked, Marcus began to notice something strange. Small acts of defiance were everywhere, if you knew how to look for them. A Thorian worker had carved a tiny star into the wall of his quarters. A group of Pixians had arranged themselves in the shape of a Christmas tree, their skin glowing in red and green patterns. Even some of the Zephyrians were participating, their usually rigid posture softened with something that looked almost like hope. Marcus realized that Christmas had become more than just a tradition. It had become a language that spoke to something fundamental in every sentient species. The desire for community, for kindness, for the belief that things could be better than they were. He reached his quarters and quickly retrieved his small tree from its hiding place. It looked so simple, so fragile, but as he held it in his hands, Marcus felt the weight of what it represented. This wasn't just about a holiday anymore. This was about the right of free beings to choose hope over despair. The sound of marching boots echoed through the corridor. Imperial enforcement teams were conducting their searches, moving systematically through each section of the station. Marcus could hear doors being forced open, the sounds of belongings being destroyed, the occasional cry of someone being dragged away. He had perhaps minutes before they reached his quarters. Marcus looked at the small tree in his hands and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Instead of hiding it or destroying it, he walked to the main corridor and set it down in the middle of the walkway, where everyone could see it. Then he sat down beside it and waited. The enforcement teams found him there 20 minutes later. 3 Zephyrian soldiers in full combat armor, plasma rifles raised, facing a single human maintenance worker sitting next to a makeshift Christmas tree. Stand up, ordered the squad leader, his voice amplified by his helmet's communication system. You are in violation of Imperial Decree 4847. Marcus looked up at them calmly. I know. Remove that contraband material immediately, and Report for processing. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, other station inhabitants had begun to gather, drawn by the sound of confrontation. They stood at a safe distance, but Marcus could see them watching. Waiting. I said remove it, the soldier repeated, his rifle now pointed directly at Marcus's head. Marcus gently touched one of the wire branches of his tree. This tree represents something your emperor doesn't understand, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the corridor. It represents the idea that even in the darkest times, we can choose to bring light into the world. We can choose to be kind to each other. We can choose to hope. More beings were gathering now. Marcus could see Zeph pushing through the crowd, his four arms gesturing frantically. But he could also see others, Thorians, Vectari, Pixians, even a few Zephyrians, all watching with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate with possibility. You have 10 seconds to comply, the squad leader said. Marcus stood up slowly, his hands empty and raised. I'm Marcus Chun, maintenance worker, serial number 847 Alpha Theta. I am a human being, and I choose to keep Christmas alive. Do what you have to do. The squad leader's finger moved to his rifle's trigger. And then, something extraordinary happened. Zeph stepped forward and sat down next to the Christmas tree. I am Zeph Carivel, hydroponics technician, serial number 923 Beta Gamma. I am Vectari, and I choose to keep Christmas alive too. A Thorian miner stepped forward next, his massive frame casting a shadow over the soldiers. Graken AK Strongarm, excavation specialist. I choose Christmas. Then, a Piscian, her skin glowing bright with determination. Then, another Vectari. Then, a group of humans from the engineering section. Within minutes, dozens of beings had surrounded the small Christmas tree, sitting in a circle of defiance that grew larger by the moment. The enforcement squad found themselves facing not one rebel, but an entire community united by a simple idea. The squad leader spoke into his communication device. Command, we have a situation in Corridor C7. Requesting backup. The reinforcements arrived within the hour. 50 Imperial troops in full combat gear, led by Captain Kexthor, one of the Empire's most decorated officers. His reputation preceded him through the galaxy. The Butcher of Centauri, the Iron Fist of the Outer Rim. Beings whispered his name in fear across a dozen star systems. But, as he stepped into Corridor C7, even Captain Kexthor paused. The circle around Marcus Chin's Christmas tree had grown to over 300 beings. They sat in concentric rings that filled the entire corridor and spilled into adjacent walkways. Humans, Vectari, Thorians, Pixians, and even some brave Zephyrians had joined the peaceful demonstration. They weren't chanting or protesting. They were simply sitting in silence, their presence itself a declaration of defiance. At the center, the small wire Christmas tree seemed impossibly bright against the cold metal of the station's floor. Captain Kexthor's black armor gleamed under the artificial lights as he strode forward, his troops forming a perimeter around the gathered beings. His helmet's targeting system identified each individual, cataloging their species, their occupations, their threat levels. According to Imperial doctrine, this should have been simple: arrest the ringleaders, disperse the crowd, destroy the contraband. But something about the scene gave him pause. Marcus felt the captain's presence like a shadow falling across the group. He looked up to see a figure that belonged in nightmares. 8 feet tall, covered in armor that had been forged in the fires of conquered worlds, decorated with medals earned through the blood of rebels. I am Captain Kexthor of the Imperial Enforcement Division, the figure announced, his voice amplified by external speakers. You are all in violation of Imperial Decree 4847. Disperse immediately or face the consequences. No one moved. Marcus stood up slowly, his knees protesting after hours of sitting on the cold floor. Around him, the other beings remained seated, but he could feel their support like a warm current in the air. Captain, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. My name is Marcus Chun. I'm responsible for this. Let the others go. They're just following my example. Kexthor's helmet turned toward him, scanners whirring as they analyzed Marcus's vitals, his stress levels, his likelihood of violence. What they found seemed to confuse the AI systems. This human showed signs of fear, but no aggression. His stress levels were elevated, but not from anger or hatred. The readings didn't match any profile in the Imperial database. You claim responsibility for organizing this illegal gathering? Kexthor asked. Marcus shook his head. I didn't organize anything. I just sat down with my Christmas tree and refused to give up hope. Everything else happened because other people made the same choice. For a moment, the corridor fell silent except for the distant hum of the station's machinery. Kexthor had crushed rebellions across the galaxy, but this was different. There were no weapons here, no battle plans, no military organization. Just beings sitting peacefully around a simple decoration. Christmas is banned by Imperial decree, Kexthor stated, though something in his voice suggested he was no longer speaking to the crowd. He was trying to convince himself. Zeph suddenly stood up, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of peaceful defiance. Then, arrest me too, Captain. Because Christmas lives in my heart now. You can destroy the tree, you can take away our decorations, you can even wipe our memories, but you cannot kill the idea of kindness. A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. Beings of different species nodded in unison, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of solidarity that needed no translation. Captain Kexthor found himself facing something unprecedented in his military career. These beings weren't attacking Imperial forces or destroying Imperial property. They weren't planning revolution or harboring weapons. They were simply refusing to give up on the belief that kindness mattered. His communication device crackled with an incoming transmission. Captain Kexthor, this is Admiral Zargoth aboard the Dominion's Edge. What is your status? The captain glanced around at the peaceful gathering, then activated his communicator. Admiral, the situation is complex. I have 300 beings refusing to disperse, but they pose no immediate threat to station security. Captain, the Admiral's voice carried the weight of Imperial authority. Your orders are clear. Emperor Vexhai himself has declared Christmas an infection that must be cauterized. Show these primitives the cost of defying Imperial will. Kexthor's hand moved to his weapon. Around him, his troops shifted nervously, waiting for orders. The beings in the circle remained seated, but Marcus could see the tension in their postures. They knew what was coming. Stand back, Kexthor commanded, raising his plasma rifle toward the Christmas tree. I am going to destroy this contraband material. Anyone who interferes will be terminated. But, as he took aim, something unexpected happened. The beings in the circle began to sing. It started with a human woman in the outer ring, her voice barely audible as she began the words to Silent Night. Within moments, others joined her, not just humans, but beings who had learned the melody from their human friends. The Vectari added their chittering harmonies, the Thorians provided a deep bass undertone, and the Pixians created visual accompaniment with patterns of colored light across their skin. The song filled the corridor with something Kexthor had never experienced in all his years of military service. It wasn't the sound of rebellion or resistance. It was the sound of hope itself, given voice by beings who refused to let darkness win. Even some of his own troops seemed affected. Kexthor could see several soldiers lowering their weapons slightly, their discipline wavering in the face of something that touched emotions they had forgotten they possessed. The captain's finger hesitated on the trigger. In that moment of uncertainty, Marcus stepped forward. Captain, may I ask you something? Kexthor's rifle tracked to Marcus, but he nodded curtly. What did you want to be when you were young? Marcus asked. Before you joined the Imperial Army, before you became a captain, what did you dream of doing with your life? The question hit Kexthor like a physical blow. For just a moment, his mind flashed back to his childhood on Zephyr Prime, to dreams of becoming an explorer, of seeing new worlds, and meeting new species as an ambassador rather than a conqueror. Dreams that had been slowly erased by years of military indoctrination. That is irrelevant, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Marcus took another step closer, his hands still raised peacefully. Christmas isn't about religion or tradition, Captain. It's about remembering that every being in the galaxy started as someone's child, full of dreams and possibilities. It's about the idea that we can choose to be kind to each other, even when everything around us says we should be cruel. The singing continued around them, growing stronger as more voices joined the melody. Even beings who didn't know the words hummed along, creating a harmony that seemed to resonate through the very structure of the station. Kexthor's mind raced through his military training, searching for a protocol that would address this situation. But there were no guidelines for dealing with peaceful beings who simply refused to give up hope. His entire career had been built on fear and intimidation. But these beings weren't afraid. They were unified by something stronger than fear. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," he said finally. "Surrender the contraband and submit to neural reconditioning. You can return to your duties with no memory of this foolishness." Marcus shook his head gently. "Would you want to forget your childhood dreams, Captain? Would you want someone to reach into your mind and erase every moment of joy you've ever experienced?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, the singing reached a crescendo, the melody of Silent Night, transforming into something that transcended species and language. It became a prayer, a promise, a declaration that some things were worth preserving even at the cost of everything else. Kexthor's communicator crackled again. "Captain, Admiral Zargoth here. Why haven't you resolved this situation? The Emperor is monitoring this directly." The weight of imperial authority pressed down on Kexthor like a physical force. He had served the Empire for 30 years, earned his rank through unwavering loyalty and brutal efficiency. But standing in that corridor, surrounded by beings singing about peace and hope, he found himself questioning everything he had believed. "Admiral," he said slowly, requesting permission to attempt alternative resolution methods. There was a long pause before the Admiral's voice returned, cold with displeasure. "You have 15 minutes to end this demonstration, Captain. If you cannot maintain order, I will send down orbital bombardment teams." The threat was clear. If Kexthor failed to act, the Admiral would simply destroy this entire section of the station. 300 innocent beings would die to eliminate a single Christmas tree. Marcus seemed to understand the implications immediately. "Captain, you have a choice to make. You can follow orders and become responsible for murdering 300 peaceful beings, or you can remember who you used to be before the Empire told you who to become." Kexthor looked around at the circle of beings surrounding the Christmas tree. He saw hope in their faces, but not naivety. They knew the risks they were taking. They knew that defying the Empire could cost them their lives. But they had chosen to be here anyway, because some things were more important than safety. For the first time in decades, Captain Kexthor made a decision based on his own conscience rather than imperial orders. He lowered his weapon. "All troops, stand down," he commanded. His soldiers looked at him in shock. Several started to protest, but Kexthor's authority was absolute within his unit. "Sir," his lieutenant said, "the Admiral's orders are my responsibility." Kexthor interrupted. He walked forward and stopped just outside the circle of beings. "May I sit down?" Marcus blinked in surprise, then nodded toward an empty space near the Christmas tree. "Everyone's welcome, Captain." As Kexthor removed his helmet and sat down among the peaceful demonstrators, his troops stared in disbelief. The face revealed beneath the intimidating armor belonged to an older Zephyrian male with scars across his green skin and eyes that had seen too much violence. But as he looked at the simple wire Christmas tree, something in those eyes seemed to soften. "I had a sister once," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. "Her name was Vellara. She would have loved this idea of choosing kindness over conquest." Marcus felt tears threatening to spill from his eyes. "What happened to her?" Kexthor was quiet for a long moment. "She spoke out against the Empire's expansion policies, said we should be explorers and teachers, not conquerors. She was neutralized for spreading seditious ideas." The word hung heavy in the air. Everyone understood what neutralized meant in imperial terminology. "I followed orders that day too," Kexthor continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was part of the unit that arrested her. I told myself it was necessary for imperial stability. I've been telling myself that for 20 years. The singing had stopped, replaced by a silence that felt sacred. Marcus reached out slowly and placed a hand on the captain's armored shoulder. "She would be proud of you now," Marcus said. Kexthor's communicator erupted with angry static. "Captain Kexthor, you have exceeded your time limit. Orbital bombardment teams are moving into position. You have 60 seconds to clear the target zone or be classified as enemy combatants. The captain looked up at Marcus with eyes full of regret and newfound determination. I can't stop what's coming, but I can make sure the galaxy knows what happened here. This isn't about Christmas anymore. It's about the right of free beings to choose hope over despair. The orbital bombardment never came. At the last possible moment, Station Commander Thylex had overridden Admiral Zargotha's orders, claiming a critical malfunction in the station's reactor core that required immediate evacuation of the target zone. It was a lie, but it bought them time that Captain Kexthor used to transmit his recordings across the Imperial communication network before Command could cut him off. Within hours, the footage of 300 beings peacefully defending a Christmas tree spread like wildfire through the galaxy's underground networks. The image of hardened Imperial soldiers removing their helmets to join the circle became an icon of resistance that no amount of censorship could suppress. But Marcus Chen knew their reprieve was temporary. The Empire would regroup, and when they returned, there would be no mercy. We have maybe 6 hours before they send a full assault fleet, Kexthor said, studying the tactical displays in the station's command center. His Imperial uniform had been replaced with civilian clothes, but years of military training were evident in every movement. The Emperor himself has declared this station a priority target. Marcus stood beside the observation deck, looking out at the vast expanse of space. In the distance, he could see the running lights of ships approaching, not Imperial vessels, but something else entirely. Refugee ships, cargo haulers, even some modified civilian craft that had somehow acquired military-grade weapons. Word's getting out, he said quietly. People are coming. Zeph joined him at the window, his 4 arms gesticulating excitedly as he pointed at the growing fleet. Marcus, these aren't just random ships. I'm seeing vessels from Vector Prime, from the Thorian mining colonies, even from the Piscian homeworld. It's like the entire galaxy is mobilizing. Over the station's communication system, they could hear fragments of transmissions from the approaching ships, messages of support, offers of assistance, and something that surprised everyone, reports from across the Imperial territories of similar demonstrations breaking out simultaneously. Station Omega 7. This is Captain Sarah Martinez aboard the free ship Endeavor. Came a transmission from the lead vessel. We received your transmission about the Christmas defense. Permission to dock and provide assistance? Marcus recognized the name immediately. Captain Martinez had been one of the first human ship commanders to escape Imperial custody, taking her entire crew with her into the outer territories. She had become something of a legend among the resistance networks. Permission granted, Kexthor replied. But I should warn you, Captain, the Empire has declared this entire system a hostile zone. Any ship found here will be classified as rebel and targeted for destruction. Martinez's laughter came through the speakers warm and defiant. Captain Kexthor, I've been classified as a rebel for 3 years now. Besides, I wouldn't miss Christmas for anything. As the ships began docking with the station, Marcus found himself overwhelmed by the diversity of beings who emerged. Humans, yes, but also representatives from dozens of species that had embraced Christmas as their own. They came armed not with weapons, but with decorations, food, music, and stories. A group of Thorian engineers immediately began reinforcing the station's defenses, their massive hands working with surprising delicacy to install shield generators and point defense systems. Vectari technicians swarmed through the station's systems, optimizing everything from life support to communications. The Pixians established what they called a Hope Network, a system of light-based communication that could transmit messages instantly across vast distances without using Imperial channels. But, perhaps most surprisingly, refugees continued to arrive from within Imperial space itself. Ship after ship brought beings who had risked everything to reach a place where Christmas was being openly defended. Among them was an unexpected visitor who changed everything. Marcus Chun. Came a voice from behind him as he worked to help coordinate the growing defense effort. He turned to see a young Zephyrian female, her green skin marked with the ritual scarification of Imperial nobility. My name is Princess Vellara Kextai. I believe you knew my brother. Marcus's heart stopped. This was Captain Kexthor's sister, the one who had been neutralized for speaking against the Empire. But she was alive, standing before him with eyes that held the same pain and determination he had seen in her brother's face. "You're supposed to be dead," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Empire wanted everyone to believe that," Vellara replied. "But a few of us managed to escape their neutralization programs. We've been working in secret, building networks, preparing for the day when someone would finally stand up and say no more." She gestured toward the bustling activity throughout the station. "What you've started here isn't just about Christmas, Marcus. You've given the galaxy something it hasn't had in decades. Proof that the Empire can be defied. That ordinary beings can choose hope over fear." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. "I never wanted to start a war. I just wanted to keep my Christmas tree." Vellara's expression softened. "Sometimes the most important wars begin with the smallest acts of defiance. My brother told me about the moment you sat down and refused to give up. Do you know what that meant to him?" Before Marcus could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The tactical displays lit up with hostile contacts. A full Imperial battle fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. "All stations, this is Admiral Zargoth aboard the Dominion's Edge," came the transmission. "You are harboring rebels and contraband materials. Surrender immediately or face complete annihilation." Captain Martinez's voice cut through the channel with characteristic defiance. "Admiral Zargoth, this is Captain Sarah Martinez. On behalf of the Free Christmas Fleet, I formally invite you to go straight to hell." What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The Imperial fleet, 12 heavy cruisers, 40 destroyers, and countless fighter craft, advanced toward Mining Station Omega, 7 expecting to crush a ragtag group of rebels. What they found instead was something unprecedented. A fleet of over 300 ships representing dozens of species, united not by military organization, but by shared belief in the right to choose hope. The Free Christmas Fleet included everything from military vessels stolen from Imperial shipyards to converted cargo haulers bristling with improvised weapons. Thorian mining ships used their industrial equipment as kinetic weapons, hurling asteroids at Imperial forces with devastating accuracy. Vectari science vessels had been modified with experimental shield technology that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. Even civilian craft joined the battle, using their own unique capabilities to support the larger ships. But the true strength of the Christmas Defenders wasn't in their weapons, it was in their unity. Imperial forces had been trained to fight against organized military units with clear command structures and predictable tactics. The Christmas fleet operated on principles they couldn't understand. Ships from different species coordinated their attacks based on shared understanding rather than rigid hierarchy. When one vessel was damaged, others immediately moved to protect it, not because of military protocol, but because they genuinely cared about the beings inside. Marcus watched the battle unfold from the station's command center, his heart pounding as he saw the incredible courage of beings who had risked everything to defend a simple idea. A group of Piscian light fighters wove through the battle like living art, their bioluminescent hulls creating confusion among Imperial targeting systems while delivering precision strikes against enemy weak points. Human vessels used tactics that seemed reckless to Imperial observers, but were actually based on deep trust between crew members who had trained together not for conquest, but for mutual protection. "They're fighting differently," Captain Kexthor observed, studying the tactical displays with professional interest. "Imperial doctrine is based on fear. Fear of failure, fear of punishment, fear of showing weakness. But these beings are fighting from love." As the battle raged, something remarkable began happening across the galaxy. The Piscian Hope Network had spread news of the engagement far beyond Imperial censorship capabilities. On worlds throughout the territories, beings watched the impossible sight of ordinary people standing up to the might of an empire. And they began to act. On Vector Prime, workers in the manufacturing centers stopped producing Imperial. He activated his suit's recording systems and turned to address his troops. "Any soldier who wants to evacuate with the non-combatants has 60 seconds to make that choice. Anyone who stays will be considered a rebel by Imperial forces. Several soldiers immediately began moving toward evacuation routes, but nearly a dozen remained, removing their helmets and joining the circle around the Christmas tree. Marcus looked around at the beings who had chosen to stay, humans and aliens, soldiers and civilians, all united by the simple belief that kindness mattered more than survival. As the countdown reached its final seconds, the small wire Christmas tree at the center of their circle seemed to glow brighter, as if it were drawing strength from the hope surrounding it. The first orbital blast would arrive in 30 seconds. But Marcus Chun and his unlikely family of rebels faced it together, their voices once again raised in song, proving that some lights cannot be extinguished by any darkness the universe can provide. The battle for Christmas was becoming something much larger, a battle for the soul of the galaxy itself. As they waited, Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. These beings came from worlds scattered across the galaxy, spoke different languages, breathed different air, worshipped different gods. But, somehow, Christmas had given them a common language of hope. The tree at the center of their circle seemed to glow brighter in the artificial light of the station, its simple wire branches reaching upward like a symbol of aspiration itself. Marcus had no idea that this moment was being recorded by the station's security cameras, or that the footage would be transmitted to resistance networks across the galaxy. He had no idea that his simple act of defiance would inspire similar demonstrations on 1,000 worlds, or that the Emperor himself would soon declare him the most dangerous human in the galaxy. All he knew was that sometimes, the most important thing you could do was refuse to let the light go out, even when the darkness seemed absolute. The sound of approaching reinforcements echoed through the station corridors, growing louder with each passing moment. But the circle around the Christmas tree grew larger too, as more and more beings chose hope over fear. The real battle for Christmas was just beginning.